I was thinking of all sorts of things the other day, and for some strange reason, the question popped into my head: what would I do the same if I was setting up my workshop again, or advising someone else to set up a workshop? And so this is a collection of I don't know whether you call them 10 tips or hints or things like that, which I think are worth repeating, and I'd certainly pass on to others as being worthwhile having a think about, maybe implementing yourself.
Once upon a time when drilling centres, I used to put a centre into a lathe chuck, and that was how I did it. And then I read in a magazine to make up a Morse taper adapter and hold the centre directly. And I thought, hey, this is a great idea. Then a friend of mine, Dave, said, well, actually, you want to extend it so that it matches your drill chuck, so you don't have to do all this winding to get from one to the other. And so I've done that, and these work beautifully. So it's a good idea if you've got the time and the inclination to extend your centre holder, and just makes it a little bit quicker to drill a centre in something. Another lathe tip: I don't use very many holders. I've probably got 10 or 15 holders in my collection. Some people have, well, I know one person who's got 50. That seems excessive to me because I've never used 50 tools in one job, but that's his choice. However, one of the things that I have used a spare holder for is mounting a dial indicator. It's just a bit of steel which I've mounted up, put a cotter in there to use for the dial indicator, and it just makes it that much easier to bring that in and centre or square up workpieces. One of the problems you can have when filing aluminium is that the aluminium will build up in the file teeth, and although you can use a file comb to clean the file, it's better if it doesn't happen in the first place. So what I've discovered, and this is a tip that I found even old school tool makers don't always know: a bit of ordinary blackboard chalk, and you put that on the file. Nothing great, just enough to fill some of the grooves, put a light coating in there. But what that will do is it will prevent the aluminium from pilling in the file. Guy has done something similar in one of his bedside readers and says use heavy oil, but I like this because it's not as messy, and it works. It stops the aluminium building up in the file. Another one worth mentioning are these. This is the T-nut I use for holding my vise down to the mill bed. Nothing unusual there, but what I've done is made up a thick washer, and then I've put a bit of a sleeve on there to try and make the washer sit more squarely on the flange there without dishing down or anything like that. This mill takes rather large T-nuts. It's an ex-industrial machine. A long time ago I standardised on 3/8 hold downs because everything else takes them, including the mill I had at the time, and so that in itself is a time saver because you don't have to worry about which set of hold downs you need to use. But I was unhappy with the way that the nuts barely bridged the gap, and if you put a washer on there, a normal washer, it'd generally cave in. So I've made these up. They're much thicker than a normal washer. They've got that sleeve on there to help locate in the thing, and I find that they do a wonderful job. One thing too about my vise is that I have a key on it to locate in the T-slot. I know some people don't like them. Tom Lipton from Ox Tool, for example, doesn't use them. I do actually use his method of lining things up when I have to, but I find for the majority of work I do, because it's just facing off or something like that, the keys are reasonably tight fitting, and yeah, it just lines up well enough for what I'm trying to do. Another lathe tip. These are known as quick change tool posts for a reason. You can change tools easily. Now they're worthwhile things to have because with the adjusting mechanism that they have, it means that once you've got the tool height set, you don't have to change again. You lock everything up and it'll just go back there. And one thing I do find strange in home workshops is the number of people who then decide, well, they need to put a wrench on there so they can, or a lever, so they can change the angle of the tool post. Not quite sure why. Instead, what you do is you put an angle on your tool tip like that. So this is a 30-degree chamfer tool. I also use it for cutting threads, but if I want a 30-degree chamfer on the end of something, that's the tool I use. Similarly for inside use, that's a carbide 45-degree cutter. The tip broke off, fed it too hard, but I find that is excellent for putting a chamfer on the inside of a turned hole. So rather than change the tool post angle to enable you to put on simple chamfers and things like that, get the tools and use those instead. And then there's this device. It's just an inclinometer that I bought at a hardware shop, but on my sheet metal brake I find that I can lift the leaf up and it'll indicate the angle I get to very easily. Handy thing to have when you're trying to bend anything really to a particular angle. It's nothing special. It's a weighted needle with a magnet on one side and a V on the other, so it can be used for all sorts of things, and I do occasionally use it for all sorts of things, but its main home is on the sheet metal brake. That's a normal chuck key. That's what came with this particular chuck, and that works quite nicely. That will sit up there, undo the chuck, all that sort of thing. However, when I got this lathe, I had a chuck key of this size to undo that. It didn't work. So what I did was actually put an extended handle on there, and that way I can have that sitting in there, and as you can see, well, it's out of shot, but as you could see if it was in shot, I've got enough clearance there that I can get past the edges of the lathe. And I like that so much that I've done it to my other chuck key, because I have a small chuck that takes that size key, and so once again I can adjust that without having to worry about bashing into the headstock. The added bonus of doing this too is that it gives you a nice long-handled chip brake, for want of a better term, so that if you've got chips bird nesting around there and you want to get rid of them, that's a nice length that your hands aren't in the chips, but you can hook them away. I don't use this one so much for that. I use the smaller one, but same thing applies. One of the things that you need to do whenever you move the head on a mill is what we call retramming. Now, there are angular scales which you can use, but they're usually not accurate enough. So one way of doing this is you put a dial indicator in the spindle and you try it from side to side, and you try and get that within, in the old measurements, a thou or two. And that's really nice, except that if you use a normal dial indicator, one side you can see the face, the other side you've got to walk around to see it. There are arrangements with two indicators, but they don't, I've never quite worked out how they make sure that both indicators are reading correctly. So this is the better solution. It's a rear plunger indicator. This one's a Starrett, but other companies do make them. Mitutoyo, I believe some of the European people like Compaq, that sort of thing, make them. This one's a rather battered one, and it came in a kit of bits and pieces. But that mounts on a on a lever arm, and so that will sit there and then swing around there. And of course the nice thing is, because the dial faces up, you don't ever have to worry about not being able to see it, so you can actually stand in front of the mill, make the adjustments on the head and not lose any visibility, which is great. It means you don't have to worry about mirrors or walking around or all the other bits and pieces. So this is another thing that I would definitely do again if I needed to. For a long time I used dividers and bits and pieces which were basically flat like that. And then a friend of mine, Phil, put me on to round leg dividers, such as these ones or those ones, for marking out circles and things. And I found they were, as he explained, a lot better because they're a bit thicker, and so they're not as flexible that way. So they're wonderful for dividing out circles and things like that. If you've got an old school pair like that, which has got a bit of decent thickness in them, then they're just as good, you know, because they won't go flexing on you. Okay, but when you have dividers with just a very thin wall to them, then yeah, they'll flex. Which brings me to the next tip. What do you do with your old dividers? Well, here's a suggestion. What I've done here, I've put done a bit of welding to fabrication, put a piece there and a scriber there, and now I've got an odd leg caliper which I can control. The problem with these, of course, is because they're a friction joint, they can move a bit. So you have to be very careful, whereas these ones here, you know that when you scribe a line on that side of the work and then you turn around and scribe a line on that side of the work, there's no chance you've inadvertently knocked that out a little bit. And here's a bonus tip. I found that the tie-down bolts in my set for the mill were sometimes a bit too long, and so I managed to find somewhere, McMaster if you're in the US, but you could make them out of some threaded rod. But I found that having a set of smaller ones, I think these are something like 1.5 inches, 2.5 inches and 3.5 or something like that, of smaller studs was very useful, both for holding down vices and things like that, but also just every so often when fixturing you need a smaller stud so it doesn't get in the way of the cutter. Anyway, I hope this has been of interest to people and useful, and thanks to those who've helped me and inspired me.